Critical Role is back, baby. Critical Role Campaign 3 has been on a roll the last few weeks with the return of Brendan Lee Mulligan and the Downfall miniseries depicting the downfall of Aeor in the Age of the Calamity. This week's episode, Campaign 3, Episode 102, returning back to the main campaign as our cast of characters are absolutely shook at witnessing the downfall of Aeor. Hello everyone, I'm Finn. Welcome back to FinFilms. Join me today as we discuss everything that happened in the Downfall miniseries as well as Critical Role Campaign 3, Episode 102, an episode where we see the fallout of the Downfall miniseries with our cast of characters. Delilah Briarwood makes a shocking, surprising appearance. As well, Ludinus finally reveals his true motivation. Campaign 3 is really starting to enter into kind of its finale, its last arc, it very much seems like, as our cast of characters are battling against Ludinus Delath and his grand plan to release Predathos, this god-killing entity from the Red Moon of Ruidus, ultimately to enact his plan of wiping the gods away from Exandria, having the mortals ultimately inherit the Earth. I'm absolutely loving the direction that this story is going, this kind of grand lore that we're touching on in Campaign 3. Campaign 3 really expanding upon so much deep lore that Matt has given us over the last 7-8 years since Critical Role's original inception. If we remember when we last left off, our party of characters, Bell's House, had currently delved into the ancient ruins of the flying skyship of Aeor, a flying skyship during the Age of Arcanum that was ultimately struck down by the gods during the Calamity, the grand war between prime deities and betrayer gods. Here in the ruins of Aeor, they met with Ludinus Delath, our kind of go-to big bad evil guy who over the course of Campaign 3 has been slowly kind of revealed to maybe not be as evil as we once thought he was. Not to say that he's not a bad guy with bad intentions, but that his motivations are, well, at least understandable. Here in the ruins of Aeor, using some kind of ancient Aeorian tech, Ludinus wants to show Bell's Hells a memory of the day that Aeor fell, ultimately a memory of the gods. This is when we are taken into the 3-part miniseries that was Downfall, our amazing cast of actors and characters ultimately playing the gods themselves in mortal avatar form, as the gods would take on avatars of mortal states, ultimately living out full mortal lives in order to bypass the kind of anti-god, anti-divine wards of Aeor to gain entrance into the city to ultimately take down this god-killing weapon, the Factorum Malleus. The gods and the betrayer gods making a truce, taking a break from their grand war of the Calamity to ultimately deal with this existential threat, as how can the gods continue to war with one another when their creations, the mortals, have now developed a weapon that is possible to ultimately destroy and kill a god. Downfall was absolutely amazing. We learned so much crazy shit from Downfall, and it sent the fan base into an absolute kind of spiral. So many amazing theories coming out from the Downfall miniseries. I actually did a whole video about one of the craziest theories that I've ever seen from Downfall, specifically a theory that this is the end of Critical Role as we know it, that Campaign 3 is the end. I highly recommend you guys go check that video out if you're interested in it, because that theory was absolutely insane. As I said, Downfall ultimately tells this story of the gods infiltrating Aeor in mortal form, and we get a better kind of look and glimpse at the gods and their relationship with one another, as they are much more similar to mortals than I think much people on Exandria probably would have expected. Ultimately, at the end of the day, both the prime deities and the betrayer gods are siblings, and as such, their relationship with one another is extremely complicated. The prime deities not wanting to destroy their betrayer god brethren, hence why they always seem to seal them away instead of ultimately destroying them. The prime deities also believing that the gods need to all be kept together, even if that means sealing the betrayers away, so ultimately they could combat Predathos should it ever return to Exandria. Here, though, we see the gods basically grapple with an impossible decision. The betrayer gods and even some of the prime deities wanting to crush Aeor and all of the Aeorians and ultimately destroy them, wiping them off the planet so they never pose another threat to them again in the future, while some of the other prime deities simply want to destroy the weapon and all knowledge of it and don't actually want to harm mortals if they can. Of course, we know the end result of this story, as the gods ultimately do crush Aeor, sending it scattering to the ground across the frozen wastes of Isolcross and destroying the Factorum Malleus, this god-killing weapon, Aeor being the last bastion of the Age of Arcanum, the last great flying magical city, and ultimately the destruction of Aeor and the ending of the Calamity would plunge Exandria into an arcane dark age of sorts. Seeing this story of downfall is extremely important for two main reasons, especially to our party Bell's Hells, as we see in episode 102. One, it gives us kind of a motivation of the gods, as well as it shows us this kind of very, as I said, complicated relationship that the gods have with one another, and how the gods are much more similar to their mortal creations than I think many people on Exandria would realize. Two, it gives us a better glimpse into the motivation of one Ludinus de Lath, our kind of assumed big bad evil guy in campaign 3. As we know, Ludinus's plan is to release this apex predator, Predathos, from the moon of Ruidus to have it devour the gods, and ultimately leave the world of Exandria for the mortals who he believes deserve to claim the world. In my opinion, Ludinus is a little bit crazy, but I think his motivations are undeniably sound when you look at his perspective, as Ludinus was a young boy during the Calamity, a young Aeorian who watched the downfall of Aeor, watched the complete change of the arcane Dark Age that was brought about post-Calamity, as well as witnessed firsthand the destruction on Exandria that was wrought at the hands of the gods during their battle, their war. Of course, to the gods, this was nothing but a family squabble. It wasn't even a war, though the consequences were ultimately grave for the people of Exandria, 2/3 of the population dying, and as I said, the world entering an arcane Dark Age, as much arcane technology and knowledge basically being lost forever. So of course it makes sense to me that a young Ludinus would harbor some hard feelings for the gods and believe that the world would be better off if the gods were to no longer exist on Exandria, or if they were just to leave. This is where we enter the events of 102 of campaign 3 as our party return from this vision of downfall. We need to remember that they witnessed this entire events that we watched in downfall, and now they have the knowledge of the gods as well as their relationship with one another and their many flaws. Ludinus really for the first time in the whole entire campaign actually giving us a glimpse of like what his true feelings are and his true motivations are. And again, his motivations are pretty obvious. Ludinus obviously feels that the gods are hypocrites and ultimately want to squash the mortals and keep them subjugated to their will, not allowing mortals to rise to their, great purpose, their great potential, as he views the Age of Arcanum as ultimately the highest level of potential that mortals were able to reach. As he says in the episode, they made something more perfect than them. Us, referring to the mortals. The Age of Arcanum was the best of our time and what we were able to accomplish. The gods' meddling brought ruin to us. We deserve to inherit the future, not them. I lived an entire human lifetime in the ashes of the world they burned and left behind. I watched as those that remain today were told to stay faithful because they love you and will guide you. They lied. First 30 minutes to hour of episode 102 was absolutely fascinating as Bell's Hells continued to kind of pick the brain of Ludinus and kind of pick at many of his motivations and thoughts and feelings that he's had. As we have to remember, Ludinus is 900, almost 1,000 years old. My man has lived through some absolutely crazy shit, and with the sole intention of fulfilling this mission of eliminating the gods from the world. Ashton, in my opinion, might have one of the most base takeaways from any of the party of campaign 3. Ashton saying that they are all betrayers, referring to the prime deities and the betrayer gods, that in fact they were all betrayers. And Ashton actually has a really good point here, especially if we think back to EXU Calamity and a certain line that Asmodeus, the Lord of Lies, said to Xerxes. Remember, Xerxes, they called us betrayers, but whom did we betray?
Our promises were to the primordials, and we were called betrayers!
Daddy, chill.
And yes, indeed, Asmodeus is kind of right. The original promise was to the primordials, so ultimately, who are the betrayers? As well, if we see that the prime deities are indeed hypocrites, they create rules and guidelines for the mortals as well as their angelic beings to follow, yet they continuously don't follow them. Who is betraying who? Not to say that the betrayer gods are good, obviously they are extremely bad, they wanted to wipe out mortals and basically completely restart, but it seems like both of our gods here, both prime deity and betrayer gods, are much more complicated than we were originally led to believe, creating for a very interesting kind of plot point dynamic here in Campaign 3, as really Campaign 3 is kind of a story of moral grayness and a story of motivation. And really, I think a story that's kind of primary plot focuses on just how mortals and gods are really not that much different in the world of Exandria. I mean, literally, we have an example of a mortal mage aspiring and claiming godhood, destroying the previous god of death and becoming the Raven Queen. So if mortals are able to rise to divinity, they are able to become divine, really, what difference is there between these mortal beings and these divine beings who they worship? Ludinus then says that he plans on revealing this vision of downfall to the rest of the world to give them a more informed choice. In his words, if the gods feed on the faith of their mortal people, what happens then when you shake that faith? Ludinus then offering Bell's Hells a chance to join him, a chance to make his dream come true. And obviously they are a bit apprehensive about this, though some of them are a little bit more on board with Ludinus' plan than others. Obviously, I am sympathetic to Ludinus' viewpoint, and I think if you look at it from his point of view, it makes a lot of sense, his reasoning for wanting to destroy the gods. But again, there's probably a bunch of information that Ludinus is not privy to. Obviously, we don't exactly know what is going to happen should Predathos be released, what the ultimately fate of Exandria would be if Predathos were to be unleashed upon the gods and the gods were to be destroyed. Obviously, we know Ludinus is not a good guy, though. He's done a bunch of horrible, evil things to try to enact this plan that he is trying to set out on the world. Ludinus obviously believing that he knows best, and as I said, he's committed great atrocities in this pursuit of his plan. Obviously, these atrocities affecting some of our party members themselves, like Aurum, the fact that Aurum's husband died protecting Keyleth, which was ordered by Ludinus to have her killed. Of course, Ludinus argues that the ends justify the means, and how could they possibly ridicule him for taking lives and doing potentially evil deeds to ultimately enact his vision when the gods have wrought so much destruction and death upon Exandria in their thousands of years of plus history on this world. And again, Ludinus makes a pretty valid point there. The gods, for all the good that they've done on the world, have also done some horrible, evil things. Even the prime deities have done some really bad things. There has been all sorts of death and destruction in our story across the long lore of Exandria that have basically been from the fallout of the actions of the prime deities and the betrayers. Again, the War of the Calamity was a great massive war for the mortals, the peoples of Exandria, but to the gods, it was nothing but a family squabble. A family squabble that left 2/3 of the population of their world dead. This conversation, though, between Ludinus and our party is cut short, though, as Ludinus realizes that deep within everyone's favorite dead girl, Laudna, lies a certain sorcerer, a certain mage named Delilah Briarwood, a mage that Ludinus has history with. As you need to remember that Delilah was once a member of the Cerberus Assembly alongside Ludinus. They know one another. Ludinus talking directly to Delilah through Laudna, basically imploring her to help join her side. Ludinus saying that he has the ability to separate Laudna and Delilah from one another so that they both may live, as he tosses a strange green gem towards Laudna, with the obviously intent for Delilah inside of her to absorb this power. Chetney intercepts this gem, though, which sets off a crazy chain reaction, as suddenly Delilah is a little bit peeved as she rends herself from Laudna's body and combat ensues, as once again our party are forced to battle Delilah Briarwood in an attempt to save their friend. Now, those of you who've watched some of my Critical Role videos before know that I'm not the biggest D&D 5e combat fan, but I really gotta hand it to Matt here for making this combat actually really interesting with a lot of the kind of different aspects, especially with Laudna kind of fighting Delilah inside of her and the kind of mechanical aspects. As well, I got to give a shout out to Brennan for the combat in episode 3 of Downfall, which was absolutely crazy. This was one of my favorite combat sections in D&D 5e that I've seen. Brennan saying in Foresighted Died that it was almost a kind of horror segment, specifically a horror segment for the mortals of Exandria, as suddenly they face off against the gods slowly gaining their power and gaining all of their divine power back. And it was just an absolutely awesome, amazing segment of mechanical storytelling within D&D 5e, a system that I think is pretty fun. Boring, yet still Brennan and Matt are managed to make it extremely entertaining. Obviously, as well, this Laudna Delilah mini is just absolutely insane, but I don't really expect anything less from Critical Role nowadays. And basically, yes, this is where our episode ends, as our party managed to subdue Delilah, returning her back to a kind of dormant state inside Laudna, as they come up with a plan using a soul anchor that was used to harness the power of a demon within Aor to ultimately try to bind Delilah to Laudna, as Essex says that he could potentially use this soul anchor to basically make it to where Laudna would be the one pulling the strings of Delilah from now on, and basically able to use her kind of as almost like an arcane battery inside of her, as this would forever really change Laudna's fate. Something that I really hope that they actually manage to accomplish in the next episode of Critical Role, as our girl Laudna has been through more than enough. She's one of the most tragic characters in all of Critical Role characters we've seen so far, obviously besides Percy being everyone's favorite tragic boy. But Laudna kind of continues the Whitestone Kid arc of making absolutely tragic characters, and I love her, and I hope that they actually manage to do this for Laudna's sake, as our girl has had way too much bad shit happen to her throughout Campaign 3. And yes, this was basically everything that happened in Critical Role Campaign 3, Episode 102, and Downfall, the newest Critical Role miniseries depicting the downfall of Aor, a return to the Calamity once again with our GOAT, my lord, my man, Brennan Lee Mulligan. Again, Critical Role is back, baby. The last month of Critical Role content has been absolutely nuts. Downfall was great. Again, besides EXU Calamity, probably some of my favorite content that Critical Role has ever put out. I think Downfall was absolutely fantastic. Anytime Brennan and Matt get to team up to do some absolutely amazing, fun storytelling, especially in a awesome epic time like the Calamity, as the Calamity is probably one of the most interesting times in Critical Role lore, and I really hope they continue to do these kind of Critical Role lore prequels mini-series going forward, as I think that it's just awesome content. As well, it gives them a chance to bring in some really amazing actors to do kind of guest appearances on Critical Role, and it's just absolutely great. It's top tier role play, top tier storytelling, in my opinion. Campaign 3 has been a really kind of weird campaign. I think it's really polarizing in the fan base. Some people absolutely loving it like me, others absolutely hating it, and I understand why. Campaign 3's pacing has been extremely odd. I made a video a couple years back about the problem with Campaign 3, specifically talking about the pacing of Campaign 3, and I definitely can see why people might have some grievances with this story, but ultimately I love it. I think that in totality, altogether, the story of Campaign 3 is amazing. It's a story that like goes back, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years in the Critical Role lore, and a story that's been like 8+ years, 8 IRL plus years in the making. It is an example of long-term storytelling at its finest. I absolutely love long-term storytelling, and it's really something that only like Dungeons and Dragons and like professional wrestling of all things can really do well. It's amazing seeing a story be this long in the making and then having this really great payoff. And there's still so many like things that have yet to been revealed in Campaign 3. Who knows how many episodes of Campaign 3 that we have left, maybe 50 or more. I really don't know. It's impossible to know at this point. All I know is that I personally think that when Campaign 3 is all said and done, it's probably going to be my favorite Critical Role campaign so far. Okay, guys, I think that was enough rambling from me. Let me know in the comment section down below what you thought of the Downfall miniseries, as well as this week's episode of Critical Role Campaign 3, and what you think the future events of Critical Role Campaign 3 we have in store for us. If you did enjoy this video, learn something new, please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, as that is the easiest way to help support me and keep these videos coming and to put this video into the algorithm. If you liked this video and you want to see more of my other Critical Role and D&D content, then click one of the videos on screen now, like the big theory video I put out just a few days ago about the potential end of Critical Role as we know it. Again, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one. Stay safe out there. Until next time, peace, love, adu.